Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. I'm very pleased that we have, it's Monday. So we get Seb, the Sebinator is always good to have with us.
Yay.
And very excited. We're coming in from all sorts of areas. We got a parking lot, we got a hotel room. We are grooving. So first things first, while I give my little diatribe, I want everybody else, make sure you're liking the show, hitting the subscribe button, hitting notification bell, doing all that grand stuff. And then I'm going to continue on with the whole concept of we are not doctors. So anything we do talk about is going to be our, oh, he's getting comfy. I like it.
I've never sat down in a podcast. I haven't had I haven't had a chair in my office in over a decade. So this is like almost refreshing.
There you go. He's chill. He's relaxed. It's part of being resilient, I guess. So yes, we are not doctors. Anything we do talk about is our own personal experience or anecdotal stuff from what we have been able to read and come up with. If you have any questions or concerns, absolutely throw them into the comment section, and we will toss them up and get them in into the show and answer the questions and all that good stuff. I think that's about it. It's not mental health month anymore, so we don't really have to talk about that stuff, which is great, but we're going to anyway. So the topic for today, pillars of resilience. And it was actually Seb gave me this idea that we should sit down and talk about this. And I was like, we absolutely should. Now I have a little definition as to what the 5 pillars of resilience are, or do you want to take it off the hop there, Seb?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So here we go. The 5 pillars of resilience are self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, positive relationships, and purpose. These pillars work together to increase our ability to bounce back from the stresses, trauma, and difficult situations that are a part of life. By strengthening these pillars, we are becoming more resilient, and as a result, we are much more equipped to manage those stresses in our lives. So that's the very basics across the board. Anybody, any thoughts on those on those 5 first, and then we can break them down? What do you got, Seb?
Yeah, so this isn't quite across the board. Those pillars are a little bit different in that they seem to get a little bit deeper in the subset of some of the actual pillars, which are spiritual, mental and emotional, physical, and those realms. So there are some theoretical axe to grind with some of the pillars and the different definitions. So, but they're all within the same world, like operating world, so to speak. And so all of those are extremely valuable and obviously necessary to bounce back, right?
For sure.
It's not an end all be all. Like all those pillars are the pillars. There's additional things that need to be considered, but they all tie into each other.
Oh, no, that makes sense. Sean, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry. And where did the 5 pillars of resistance come from?
So resilience, I pulled it off yeah, I pulled it off of the wellbeingproject.co.uk, and they have a whole things here.
Pillars.
Whole pillars.
They have several pillars.
They have pillars, yes, exactly. You could call them silos, you can call them whatever you want, but I think really what it comes down to is, as Seb said, it's kind of actually, thinking about it, it's almost like the old 4 elements, the fire, earth, air, water kind of deal, in that there are different realms that we all need to build resilience in. So
sure,
I think that's where we're going. So do you want to dive into some? Actually, Seb, why don't you give us a rundown of the 4 that you brought up, and then we can compare and contrast.
Yeah, I mean, we can just go one at a time.
Sure. So, I think
what we're talking about physical. I think it's important. Let's start with this because this is one of the most misunderstood concepts. Is that anything that we do that impacts us is impacted further if the physical falls off. But also, the first inclination of most people when things go wrong is to let the physical slide. And so now you're compounding issues. And so it's important to understand that the 4 pillars of resilience, as in the ones that I named, are actually the 4 pillars of recovery. So when an occupational stress injury or even a trauma, like a life-induced trauma occurs, they're the same pillars that are going to be tapped into in order to recover from whatever predicament you were in. And so that begs the question, and I digress. I'm diverting a bit here, but bear with me for a sec. And so, if you have those four pillars, and you are implementing all the healthy mechanisms within those pillars, and you do so preemptively, you're far ahead of the game. If you wait for an action to happen or for something to take place in order for you to start sort of zeroing your life in that direction, you're a little bit late. It's not that it's too late, but it's late. It's reactive, and when it's reactive, it's harder. And now you're going to be in a different mindset. You're going to be affected, mentally and emotionally, and it will be harder to do it with some clarity and stoicism, right? To have the ability to maximize. And so, critically important to start living your life investing in those very pillars, each of the four banks. So I picked a physical to begin with. Physical is, when I hear the old, I want to get back on the bandwagon, or I need to get back in shape, or I need to, whatever the case may be. The fact is, and I've said this before, we should never get off the bandwagon. Like, that is a fundamental skill, just like fitness is a fundamental skill for some of the most high speed jobs out there. It actually having a base fitness level, i.e. a fundamental health, is the fundamental for our health and our capacity to be well on the day to day. So if you're only looking at fitness as some sort of extra that you get to do in your life from time to time when everything goes well, you're doing it wrong. It's important to continuously seek to be better in the physical realm as well as any other realm. So that means hitting the gym, going to yoga, whatever that means for you. And if you're lucky, you might have something in your life that brings you a physical peace, and it works hand in hand with your mental and emotional peace. Some people love to go on long runs so that they can just take their minds and kind of let it wander, or it helps them with focus. Some people love the mat because it puts them in a fight-like or a combat-like situation where they're able to stop thinking about other things and focus on what they need to do to get themselves out. So everybody has their own thing.
Yeah,
I'll leave it
absolutely.
at that.
Shaun, you got anything?
Yeah, just getting off the ferry just a little while ago, and observing people on the ferry. And what I was thinking on this subject right now, I wasn't thinking about the subject while I was on the ferry, but I'm reflecting on the ferry ride, and I'm thinking that I didn't see much resilience. What I did see was quite a lot of soft people. And so, well, what is resilient? Is it physical resilient, mental? What is resilience? How I would like to view it right now is, well, what isn't resilient? And it's a lot of society. And so my observation was this, and I know it's going to probably irritate some people, but I saw a lot of soft people that were flaring out through their clothing, or through their hair, or through their fashion. And they were trying to be be recognized for their bright orange hair with some blue streaks in it. And so rather than being made aware, or rather than being observed by people for strength, or for confidence, or for being able to sit still and just hold your space in a quiet state, what I saw was a bunch of people trying to gain attention. And so when I see that kind of thing, when someone is self-conscious because they don't have self-confidence, then they tend to flare out with fashion, or with talking way too loud, or making a little dramatic moment for the entire ferry trip. And if they weren't so soft, if they were resilient, I think they'd be able to hold their space a whole lot quieter, a whole lot more at peace. And so, if you are resilient, to my point, you aren't fussed by too many things. You don't get upset by too many things. You don't have to get all crazy if you are resilient, because there's nothing out there that's going to phase you too much. And so resilience contrasted against absolutely not resilient should help categorize, well, what are we talking about? Because we can hypothetically talk about going onto the BJJ mats, and you get your rolls in, and then you get harder, you get tougher, you get stronger, you get better at adversity, and blah, blah, blah. But no one sees the mats. There's a pile of people who barely know what the mats look like. But what we do see on a constant basis is people walking up and down the sidewalk, or people walking around a city, or people on a ferry. And you don't know if they roll or not unless they look confident, unless they look strong, unless they look like they've dealt with adversity. And you can see that, you can smell it from a mile away. If someone is just holding their space confidently, they're resilient because they've faced adversity. Because in order to face adversity, you gain confidence. And so, pillars of resilience, I like to contextualize it against who is absolutely not resilient, so you can gain that bandwidth understanding. Does that make sense?
I like that. It's so it's similar to being able to see the table without the legs, or seeing the forest can't see the forest through the trees. Right? We could talk about the forest as a whole, but until you actually break down what the trees are and how those things intermix amongst each other, we can't really discuss resilience as a whole, because you don't.
All right. Well, what is resilience? Well, we contextualize it through what is the opposite of resilience. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's see the ops. And again, I like your point. You got something to say, Seb? You look like you're...
I was, I had this thought that came through my mind that comes from somebody that we all respect tremendously by the name of Bruce Lee. And one of the things that he was talking about was, imagine how powerful you can be if words don't hurt you, right? And here's another example to Shaun's point about, we live in a society of victim right now, where words are hurting people, and we haven't even starting to get into the physical realm because we're so comfortable here, we don't even have a clue. But imagine if we transpose that comfort that we lived here in the West Hemisphere and went somewhere else where there's actual hardship that comes along with life. That would be, and that's circumstantial hardship, not just whatever is going on through your life. So you're still getting whatever is going on through your life, but also your circumstances are such that your life is ridden with adversity. Mm-hmm. We're just very, very comfortable, right? So now we're so comfortable that we worry about little things like words and anyways, I digress. Just in line.
No, I don't think you do digress.
Yeah,
I think go ahead, Chance.
I was going to say the same, is that I don't think you're digressing at all. Is that it's actually to the point. I did it. Yeah, it's to the point in that I had Corey over last night. Corey Hatt. He was hanging out at my house, and I cooked him a beautiful elk tenderloin.
Elk tenderloin.
So
it'd be so nice if I had one.
It would, yeah. If you came over to my house, you're sure, man.
Carry on.
Let's be resilient here. Anyway, we had him over, and we were talking. We were kind of chatting, and I was saying, I'm so glad I don't have to dig trenches anymore, because it sucks. And we started talking about like trench warfare and all these things we're talking about overseas going on right now. But my wife looked at me and she's like, "What are you talking about? I got lots of gardening. You're gonna be digging trenches all day." And I'm like, and both Corey and I both looked at her kind of the same way, like, that is not the same. But I'll dig a garden all day long before I start digging trenches, right? And so I started describing, the basics of it, and I was like, it's not just about digging a hole. You got to dig a hole with straight walls, and it's got to be up to the armpits of the tallest person, which is usually this guy. And the guys who are smaller than me, they're going to have to go through a bit of resilient checks throughout digging that hole as they keep going lower and lower and lower and lower, and then they got to build themselves stairs and so on and so forth. But I think it goes to your point in that most of Western society doesn't know what it's like to dig a trench, let alone live in a trench, let alone fight out of a trench. So we're not even at step one of resilience of just understanding the basics of it, because we've never had to.
And further to that, by the way, as everyone's out there imagining digging a trench, whether they've dug one or not before, chances are their first thought was digging it in summer. And my first thought was digging it in the middle of February and then living in it. It's hellish. It is not good. You can you can dig an inch an hour because the ground is so frozen. And so, the idea being that everyone has their own little life experiences that then they contextualize the subject of resilience against. And so, if we're using the trench example, your wife thought about flowers. A bunch of people thought about digging a nice soft trench in a nice soft summer dirt. And then a bunch of people are clueless. And then there's a small handful who are thinking about digging a trench under effective enemy fire. And so contextually, it all depends on what you've done in your life or where you've been or what you've seen or what you've heard and whether it sank in or not, sank into your head so that you can understand that massive bandwidth of whining versus not whining. And if you've only seen trenches on the movies, well, I mean, you're probably gonna be real quick to whine about when someone hands you a shovel. But if you've had a shovel in your hand so many times you could rename the shovel Sean. Well, I mean, then you have a different understanding of what trenches are. And again, a lot of these subjects are contextual, but I don't want to overlook the term resilience as if it's just a Webster's dictionary word that we can all nod and agree that, oh, we all now understand what it means. Because a lot of us
Well,
aren't seeing the subject through the same set of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, we understand, sort of theoretically what it means, but theoretical world and where the wheels meet the pavements are two different things. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's so the definition doesn't really change. The interpretation of the definition
That's right.
based upon the context of each person, right? So I totally agree with that. I dig that. One of the things that I suppose we could mention is that there is such things, and just as far as the reference goes for these four pillars of resilience that we spoke about here, that I brought on, they're from the American Psychology Association. So those guys are pretty squared away. But one of the phenomenon that goes on with physical and the mental and the emotional is called a psychosomatic, right? Where something
Mhm.
will cause so much issue mentally and emotionally that it will eventually affect you physiologically. And this is real. The people give themselves cancer. People can cause so much stress that it can create ulcers and all kinds of things. And so, preemptively being in the right sort of physical condition predisposes you to deal with challenges better to begin with, and that's just as a preemptive course of action. If you are doing it during struggle, it keeps you sane. If you're doing it after, it helps with recovery. And so, having healthy life mechanisms when it comes to your physical fitness, your physical abilities, your wellness is a fundamental piece, as mentioned earlier. But it has to be upkept. That's the last thing you should be skipping.
Yeah,
Something comes to mind. Chance, could you do me a favor and could you pull
absolutely.
up that video that Tanya sent us that we were going to discuss several days ago? We just never got around to it. And it was all those fake panic moments where
Yes.
the lady just walks in and starts faking out like there's a monster in the house or
Oh yeah,
whatever. And the guy reacts like, like it's so embarrassing. And it's the epitome of zero resilience almost, you know what I mean? It's just so ludicrous, some of the responses, but it speaks to general, not all society, because it's mostly Western society that is exceedingly soft nowadays. I can think of many countries that are way harder than North America, but ironically, our North America thinks it's the hardest continent in the world, which is, I don't know, I'd put it the last, actually.
Yeah, we're pretty
We're
soft,
the
I think.
we're the worst.
Yeah. I will absolutely pull that up. Just take me a
Mm,
second to
sure.
get it, but I do want to throw these up real quick before we get into the next portion. Martin Dominic, what's up, boys?
and
Good to see you,
Martin.
buddy.
What's up,
Yep.
Martin?
And KH Arctic Warfare, very long 4 months. Yes,
Yeah.
it really is. So when you start, I never did the Arctic Warfare. I know a bunch of people who did it, and they came back telling stories, and I was like, fun
And that's
times, fun
that's
times.
without bullets fired at you. Just
Yeah,
imagine, like in last year in the winter, there's all kinds of trench fighting footage from Ukraine, and holy man.
yeah,
Yeah,
it does not sound
yeah.
fun.
I mean, thank goodness I've never faced that kind of situation because it looks diabolically heinous. But to contextualize it as an example, we jumped into Alaska way back in the day, and we were OPFOR, or opposing force, for a large American contingent up in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, Camp Wainwright, and because we were enemy force, I mean, we were just used to doing our thing, and we're pretty hard charging. And the force, the friendly force, we'll say, that was supposed to be defending against us was a very large American contingent. I don't know any other way to categorize it other than they were literally out of their element. A large chunk of the contingent had flown up from Florida.
Oh, wow.
This is like January, man.
Yeah.
And it was freaking freezing. And I remember our commanding officer, I was with the PPCLI at the time, when I remember in the pitch black, like an Arctic wolf, looking at these victims that I was just about to get after. And they were so wholly unprepared. It could be a Wikipedia definition. And so when I hit that tent line, just tent after tent after tent, all laid out perfectly symmetrical, because that's the best way that you can deliver the rations every day, tent to tent to tent. Don't want to put anyone out of their rhythm. Basically, I ran through right down that entire tent line, slashed every tent line, did a fish hook, slashed all the other tent lines as I went by, and then I laid the boots to anyone who started moaning. I mean, we put the boots to those boys. And I mean, it's not war. So you dodged a bullet. We're opposing force, and we're demonstrating that you all suck right now. And so their resilience, to my point, was this: screw this, I'm going back to bed. Not a one of them got out of their tent to defend their position or go on the offensive or whatever. They just freaking quit. We had to stop the assault because they weren't responding in a way that was appropriate for the moment. They just went back to bed. And of course, it was a topic of conversation for the remainder of that month that we spent up in Alaska. It was embarrassing for that organization as far as I was concerned. But again, back to resilience. Who are you, and what have you faced in the past? Well, if you're a Florida boy and you've never seen snow, chances are snow is hard on you. Don't even think about warfare, because snow is hard for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I got that video. If you want me to throw it up right now, we can discuss it.
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Okay, here we go. We're going to throw it up on the screen, and we will get it rolling. Okay, so this is the invisible danger prank, apparently. And people think this is funny, but yeah, here we go.
Can you expand that in any way? Or
no, I have to share the screen itself. I can't get it open, but as you can see, it's just sheer panic.
It's basically what you're seeing is a lady walk in and pretend that there's something going on, and then the man just freaks out like there's an invisible monster.
Yeah. And the funny thing I think about this whole thing is that there's just people don't know what to do. Like, you can really actually see the fight, flight, freeze situation, right? And it's like flight instantaneously.
Well, they have no idea what's going on, so there is nothing to do.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm picturing myself in each of these moments, and the initial surprise is like, okay, I'm gonna not flinch, but I'm gonna steel up, and then, I mean, that guy who was just waving his hands like he was a chicken, that's insane. I mean, his response was this, and he just froze. I mean, what is even going on? They're ghost fighting.
I watched this 10 times over, and I killed myself.
I watched it twice, and that I could only do 2 because I lost faith in humanity there for a second.
Yeah, there's like I agree with you, Shaun. There's an initial reaction, right? There's a little bit of fear, or a little bit of a startle response.
Yeah,
startle response. There we go.
Arousal response.
Arousal response. Yeah, there we go. And outside of that, though, like, it's the after effect. It's the 10 to 15 seconds of just like absolute frozen or complete flight, or a few other things.
But that is not resilient.
Definitely not resilient. No,
and why isn't resilient? Because the guy who was sit there, he looked like he was carrying a lot of extra weight, so he's not a physical specimen. he looked soft to me, which means that he hasn't faced enough adversity. And his response kind of played out in my quick visual snapshot of him, a categorization, call it profiling, if you will. But when I saw that guy responding, that's how he's going to respond for the rest of his life. Frozen in the moment, flapping his hands like a chicken for as long as it takes until someone steals his wallet or clips him upside the head and drags him off to the cannibals. I mean, the lack of resilience comes out of a lack of adversity, which comes out of a lack of physical training, which comes out of a lack of mental training, which is the loop of chicken boy. I mean, that is the direction that society is going as a whole. You can dye your hair any color you want. That doesn't increase your resilience. That doesn't make you more better to deal with adversity. And so throwing on a Velcro patch on your sleeve does not increase your resilience. And so I see a lot of proxies or a lot of shortcuts or a lot of does absolutely nothing for you other than appease your mind to make you feel like you're now the punisher. And that is absolutely not the case in most instances.
That's a good point. Anything to add, Seb?
Yeah,
No.
not really.
Good to go. Okay, so I got a comment here. Salty Drink says we as Westerners mistake money and comfort for resilience. Like you've said, it takes leaving it to grasp the. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be worded. Salty, you might want to work on that. The how dark the world is outside the lenses of the media. Yeah, it is. I think we're sheltered from it, and it goes back to something very similar to. I was talking with a friend of mine. They were talking about their kids, and they were like, "Oh, I don't really want to do that because, I don't want to break the spirit." We were talking about the Easter Bunny, and they were like, "Yeah, they're about that age. They're starting to figure out that doesn't exist." And like, I guess I probably shouldn't have just broken that. But even then, there's a concern for somebody else's
Fantasy.
Yeah, that and they don't want to hurt even just that little bit, that concept, let alone the physicality of everything else. And it's
I told my daughter, I said, look, I'm not going to tell you if the tooth fairy is real or not, but what you're going to do is next time you lose a tooth, put it under your pillow and don't tell anybody. See if she comes to visit you. She wakes up the next morning and I get a text from my ex-wife. She's like, way to ruin the tooth fairy.
My family still talks about how I ruined Christmas for the boys when I looked at the gas fireplace and said, "Do you think Santa Claus comes down that?" I mean, come on. I get it for like 4 or 5 or 6-year-olds,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
no need to burst the fantasy bubble when they're that young.
No.
But at a certain point, we all have to grow out of our fantasies.
I think that's a great point. It leads into those next pillars of resilience, right? Like there's the physical side of it, but there's also the emotional side of it. There's also the spiritual side of it, I think you said as well.
Yep.
And then what was the fourth one?
Social.
Social. There you go. But that's all part of it, I think, is that it's as you grow up, those fantasies start to get removed, right? You stop thinking of the world in terms of a fantasy realm, and you start thinking of more of the physical realm. And if there is no break in that, if you go into teenage and adulthood with all of these fantasies still in place, you're not prepared to manage the actual physical side of the world because everything is still fantasy to you. And I think I struggled with that. I look back on my life before I joined the military, where I started actually having some serious adversity that I had to deal with. And it was full of fantasies all over the place, even into my late teens and 20s before I joined up there. I look back and, oh man, I had all kinds of fantasies as to how the world worked that it doesn't. And it's a hard wake up, but once you actually see those things, it allows you to develop into that next realm, I think. And because if you're stuck in the fantasy realm, there's no way you can deal with the physical realm. If you can get into the physical realm, then you can start looking into the metaphysical realm. Then you can start looking to the next, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and go down the path. So I think that's part of it. Any thoughts?
There are a couple of things there. One is there's to this. I mean, currently there's grown men who still have a Peter Pan complex. They think they're Peter Pan. I mean, and then the other aspect is, let's say someone as a 6-year-old all of a sudden realizes there's no Santa Claus, and now they're moving towards adulthood. And then maybe they get out of their fantasy world and they start interacting with the real world. Then they maybe start facing some adversity. Maybe they start developing some resilience. And then they get out of the army, and then they just stop, and then they get softer. And so I don't think it's a case of at the age of 6, you just simply do this linear trajectory that goes straight up to the Peter Pan moon. I think that there's some ebb and flow unless you are consistently focused and disciplined on always striving to be more resilient. And the word resilience is barely in most people's language. They don't pursue it. They don't pursue resilience. But if you're not pursuing it, then what are you doing? Are you counting on the fact that, and this is just out to the internet, are you counting on the fact that you spent a period of time in serving your country, as an example, and then once you get out of that service, somehow it's an investment that grows, like a TFSA or some sort of ETF, where you invest an amount of money and then sit back and it starts doubling itself every 10 years. That's not how resilience works.
Mm-hmm.
Resilience doesn't have a return rate if you just sit on your hands and do nothing. What it actually does is someone starts clawing back some of that investment that you sat on, and slowly erodes it. And if you're not paying attention, pretty soon you're bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you owe someone a debt. And that debt is your mind. That debt is to yourself. And that debt, some people can't pay. And then you've got someone who is so non-resilient, and they're struggling so hard against the softest breeze of the wind, that then they start considering alternatives because of their mental health that is dragging them down into that deep, dark hole, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really on point, Shaun. It could, in my opinion, it couldn't be more on point. I think a lot of people think that resilience is externally induced. And to a certain extent, it is correct that adversity, which is one of the mechanisms by which resilience increases, is often externally induced. But it can also be internally induced, as we all know, by doing things that are uncomfortable, by doing things that are hard, by doing things. And so there is, and to think that there is no benefiting from the internally induced adversity versus the externally induced adversity, the body really doesn't make a difference in that. But for you, when you're negotiating something difficult and you've put yourself through the ringers on so many times, that is going to be where you draw your perspective from. And we don't have perspective if we're not exposed to anything, or if we don't do the proper research to find it. And even if we do, if we've never felt it, it won't have the same impact. Whereas if you have internally induced adversity and you're able to seek perspective within yourself, you don't need any external factors whatsoever to realize that the predicament that you're in comparison to some of the things that you have done, is nothing, or that it will be that you have the ability to overcome it. And so waiting there, sitting, waiting for resilience to increase is an absolutely failed strategy. It doesn't work. That is not how this works. And so it is important that we do things that increase our resilience internally, so when the external world hits us, we can get the perspective from within to deal with the external factor. And once we have dealt with the external factor, it gives us a set of perspective that's now even stronger, because it came from something that was completely out of your control, and it came in and it hit you and you bounced back. So now you have a bit of self-confidence that builds around that also. But sitting there waiting for resilience to increase, good luck.
Yeah, it's not an investment, man. It's not an investment. You got to earn every day to put it in the bank of resilience.
Yeah. What I love to do with my life, and I know, Shaun, you and I have had this conversation lost before, but every chance I find myself in a very, very uncomfortable situation by way of anything, and that's a daily operation, I will purposefully sit there and suck it up. Like when I say suck it up, I don't mean suck up the pain that's associated with it. I mean suck up the event, like whatever is happening right now, so that I can actually test myself in that. I'll give you an example of this. A couple weeks ago, I'm at the gym. I'm just about to start a workout. Everything's peachy. My trainer calls me from the bike, and some freaking blood curling scream comes from outside. So I run outside. There's 3 kids that are frozen. They're all going to be NHLers. They're frozen, looking at this guy that's on the ground in absolute pain. And I'm like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "We don't know." So I go to him and I go, "Okay, what's going on?" Blah blah blah. Find out that his hip is dislocated. Okay, so his hip is dislocated. He's all sideways. Start doing a bit of an assessment. Long story short, I had him under traction, so he needed to have traction on his hip, because as soon as you released it, he lost his mind. So I sat there on my sciatic, on the side of my leg that's obviously not good, and I had him under traction. And we called the ambulance, and they said, "Okay, the ambulance will be there in 10 minutes." And then it was 15 and 20 and 30 and 40. After 10 minutes, my back was fully lit up, lactic loaded, everything hurt. My leg was absolutely useless, and I felt like I need somebody to take this over. But this isn't happening at all. I'm going to stay here, keep him under tension. And I stayed there for every single minute for an hour and 55 minutes until the ambulance woke up. And so the point I'm making here is, during that hour and 55, there was an hour and 45 that wanted to let go. Like, for an hour and 45, I wanted to let go and somebody else to replace me. But I saw it as a impromptu opportunity to test my gut, my mental fortitude, to test my ability to stick it, to test my ability to stay there and make it happen. And then it was such a confidence builder, because I haven't done anything that physically demanding in a couple of years now, right? And you start, to Shaun's point, you start kind of going down a bit. And so it allowed me a platform for myself to reinforce it to me that when the going gets tough, I'm capable of sticking it. And that was a critical piece for me on that day.
Absolutely. Yeah, nobody saw you do that, other than maybe some passersby who took some photos and then kept on walking. The only person that probably is aware of it is you. But that moment then delivers you to the world for another year. You now have a certain feeling within yourself, a certain self-confidence, a certain reaffirmation of you're good to go. And that's important, because I'm going to make I'm going to make my point through a quick story from today on the ferry. Just as we were about to get off the ferry, I said to Keegan, "Hey, just going to use the bathroom and meet down at the car, and then we're busting off up to Campbell River." So I was in there. As I walked in, I saw a guy with a green backpack on, a standard issue 511 pack, and there was a set of cherry jumper wings on there. So for those who don't know, it's a set of Canadian jump wings, military, and it's got a red maple leaf in the middle, unlike a silver maple leaf for someone who was in an operational unit, etc. And so I saw the cherry jumper wings, and I pulled up to my stall, and I'm doing my thing, and I glanced over and I said, "Hey man, what's with the cherry jumper wings?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I served." I said, "Yeah, I can see that. Who were you with?" And he said, "Well, I was blah 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 and blah blah blah, and I was with the RCR." And I said, "Bro, RCR? Are you kidding me? PPCLI, pal, all the way." And we both kind of laughed. And he said, "Oh yeah, I saw you walking. I saw you walking through the ferry with your Pathfinder shirt on." And I said, "Yeah, you probably saw me walking around with a little bit of attitude." And he said, "No, you were walking around like a Pathfinder." And that's the thing, man. I mean, if you've been in the game, if you've done hard things, you just walk a certain way, you look a certain way, you see a certain way, you smell a certain way, you hear a certain way. You're just a different person if you faced a boatload of adversity and you believe in yourself. Whereas there's a lot of people who have faced zero adversity in respect to contextualizing against like freaking hard adversity. And they're walking around looking at their shoes. They won't look people in the eye. They are hiding out of sight. in the stairwell because they don't want to be around people because inside they're scared. They haven't faced enough adversity to get resilient, to be resilient in the world. Now, there's a difference between being resilient in the world and emanating resilience. And I guess I emanate it. I don't know. I don't try to like laser blast everyone with my self confidence, but I'm a freaking confident guy, man. In respect to the average day, doesn't mean I can one leg hop up Everest. I can't, but I'd give it a go. I would give it a go. And if I failed, so be it. But I'd only fail if I died. Because if someone says you got to do it, I'm going to freaking give it my best until I got no breaths left in me. And that is the distinction between how much you're in the game and how much you think you can put into the game. Seb, I had a meeting with someone in my hometown of Rossland just a few days ago before I came out on this, first name Matt. And he was off to go do a thing. And he said, hey, you got any tips? We sat down for about an hour and a half to talk about what he was about to enter into. And I'm not going to say everything that I said to him, but I summed it all up with this, with a final sentence. And I said, hey, man, all I want to hear is you go as hard as you can, and you're going to go hard enough that you'll die. Freaking prepare to die, man. Don't quit. Die. So you're either going to pass or I'm going to read your obituary. That's that. And so it comes down to your conviction and what you want in life and how deep you're going to go into life and how much life you're going to absorb through that conviction. And I feel that one of the missing ingredients in resilience to face adversity is people, you gotta have conviction, man. You gotta want to do, not think. You gotta go do. And to go do, you gotta go want to do it hard. And if you're into something that is creating adversity and you quit at 50% in, you didn't have enough conviction. But the beauty of conviction is conviction will create an outcome of facing adversity, but it will also create something inside of yourself. It's a new language, understanding yourself on how much you're willing to sacrifice, how much you're willing to put sweat, blood, and tears on the line and just keep putting it on the line, irrespective of not seeing the finish line or not. It's just you're all in, all the chips. And so few people have put all their chips in enough to understand that, you know, there's a price to be paid to get a lot of resilience.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how the society now is prioritizing catering to softness and mistake or mixing up, you know, self-care with cutting yourself too much slack. And so I think what's important to understand is that, generally speaking, the average person does not need to worry about overtraining. You know, if we're looking at the physical realm, in the same token, generally speaking, the average person does not need to cut themselves a break. They don't need an extra break.
They need to double down is what they need to do. The average person needs to double down.
And right now, if you go essentially in this cancel culture that we have going on, if you go out and you even speak those words that are, it's profanities almost, right? Like it's so frowned upon. It's like, no, working harder isn't necessarily going to make you successful. Yes, correct. Working harder doing the wrong thing isn't going to do that. But it's the only way to achieve whatever it is, level of greatness that you are seeking or optimizing your own performance. It doesn't have to be in comparison to anybody else. But what we are now is a society of victim, and in that society of victim, we are consistently cutting ourselves breaks when we should be cutting ourselves less break, not more.
Right. And you know, I think it's being categorized or misrepresented. There's a movement afoot right now. I forget what the term is. It's starting to kick off in Asia, and it's been going for a while. And it's I forget the term, but basically, it's lay on your back for the majority of the day. Like, don't move, don't do anything. Just like it's not quiet quitting. It's something more than that. It's quiet quitting on life or whatever. I forget what the term is, but basically it's this: like, do the opposite of being resilient. And so the culture out there that frowns upon really, really pushing yourself generally tends to open the sentence with, why would you work that hard at work? What don't It's an institution. Don't work for the man. Don't spend an extra hour or two at work. It's not for you, it's for the man. But that's a distortion of creating resilience. Listen, I kind of agree. You shouldn't work for an institution that doesn't care for you that hard. What you should do is you should leave on time if the company doesn't care for you, or you don't care for the company. You should leave on time and then start developing some resilience for yourself. Like, don't take the sentence of quiet quitting to mean quiet quitting on life. You can quiet quit at the institution that you don't care about, I suppose. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying I suppose you can do that. But don't distort it into now it's a 24/7 quiet quit on you. You should never quit on yourself. In fact, you should double down.
I agree.
I
And
think
you know,
there's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Seb.
sorry, I was just going to say, for me, there's even more, there's something to be said about having difficulty working for a certain organization or for a certain boss or whatever the case may be, that makes me want to figure it out. It makes me want to figure it out. What am I missing here? What can I internally change to optimize my relationship within the context of this job with this boss that's really difficult? And I found myself over the years in a situation where I was the only one that could work with a boss. Like, literally, everybody else is just falling apart at the seam. And I'm like, the reason why this is occurring is because you're trying to change that person instead of changing you. And so for me, even if things aren't right and the circumstances are right and all of those other things, if you focus on yourself and the things that you can do to optimize the growth through this difficult relationship, let it be at work or whatever the case may be, you can almost always come back stronger and better. But as soon as you say, well, I don't even like that organization anyway, so I'm going to cut some corners, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you may be affecting the company's bottom line, I'll give you that, but you're affecting your bottom line also.
Agreed. I agree. I was reluctant to put it across that way, but I only did it that way so that people could kind of synchronize with this thing that's going on out there. But I'm in full agreement that if it's tough at work, freaking figure it out.
100%.
Get harder, get more resilient, suck up that adversity and figure it out, because the problems at work are the parallels of the problems in life. And if you can't figure it out at work, then you can't figure it out in life. But if you aren't working on yourself because work isn't working for you, then what are you left to work with? You're not nailing it at work. You're not nailing it in yourself. You're not nailing it in life. When do you nail it?
You're a victim.
You know? Victim.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's actually kind of interesting because it goes right back. This is why physicality is such a great allegory for resilience as a whole, because it's built upon small increments, like literally built upon small increments. So if you can't lift 100 pounds right now, you can work your way up to 100 pounds to a point that 100 pounds is no issue for you anymore. And that way, if something happens that you need to pick up, say, 100-pound small person and run with them, you'd have that capability to do that. But that works.
But getting back to what we were saying earlier, you can't work your way up to 100 pounds and think, check in the bag.
Exactly. That's what I was
for
going
the
to say.
rest of my life.
If you don't go to the gym after that,
pounds when I was 20.
right?
Check. I'm 60. I'm good to go.
Dude, you can't come past, Lord. You literally, you're only as good as the last time you faced adversity and how you reacted to it. I don't care how much adversity you faced, all this good stuff, because it is a perishable skill. And if you've been comfortable for too long and it happens and you're falling apart at the seams, you have an issue on your hands, like a serious issue on your hands, and you just can't have that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you've got it's an even worse situation as I see it, because a resume is not resilience if you're not repeating it every day. And so 3 R's. And the idea being that if back in the day you were resilient and you sat on your hands for a decade and you're still thinking that you're resilient, the moment that you need to be resilient and you're half the man that you thought you were, how do you think that plays out in your head?
Yeah, it's a very negative cycle, that's for sure. And I can speak from experience. It's not, it does not help in any way. I do have a bunch of comments here, but any other thoughts, real quick? Good to go.
Comment,
Okay.
buddy.
All right, we got Tanya from earlier during the video. She said, "I would gently put forth the suggestion that it's guided/progressive overload of adversity, or being able to be upskilled and then contextualize it after."
I agree.
I agree to some extent, except every once in a while, it's got to be the complete opposite of gently. It's got to hit you like a thunderbolt right upside of the right temple and floor you. And you should be left like blinking and wondering what just happened from time to time.
I think that's a great use of competition as well. Like if you're in a particular sport or something like that, you can utilize, especially jiu-jitsu as being one of them. If you think you're really good at jiu-jitsu, go to hit the competitive mats. That'll shock you sometimes if you're not training for it.
And to Shaun's point, do it when you've never competed, and do it when you've never done competitive training.
Yes.
I used to do this all the time. I wouldn't be running for 6 months because I'd be doing other things, CrossFit, whatever. And eventually I'd be like, I'm going to put my running shoes on today and do 32 kilometers. And people were like, you haven't ran in however long. It doesn't matter. I'm not there to test my running. I know my running is not where my running should be. What I want to test is my gut.
That's right.
You know?
I
Gut
like that.
checks, 100%.
Then we got Martin Dominic. He says, did many winter warfare training in the Van Dues and winter rescue ops as SAR. And the number one threat is always the element. Arctic survival skills are your best weapon. Always. 100%. The skills, not the stuff.
The skills, maybe. The mind, definitely.
100%.
You can put a guy out there in his underwear, and if he's tough enough, he'll freaking figure it out. He'll have birch bark for shoes. He'll have pine cones for a helmet. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. You've got to be tough. You don't need the skills. The skills are a bonus. The skills will make you survive longer, but you can have all the skills in your back pocket, and if you ain't tough, prepare to die.
Yeah.
But if on the other side of that, you can be super tough and have zero skills and you can still die. So it's handy to have, especially in the Arctic, that's for sure. Tanya then hits us with, I've heard studies show during selection, soft guys are able to return to a parasympathetic state after a beatdown.
Yep.
What things do or did you employed to downregulate?
Perspective.
I like that.
I did nothing. I did nothing except do my job as I was taught.
Yeah, but the reason why you're capable of doing you is because you've been in those other situations before. So that's perspective.
Experience, yeah.
And so experience, perspective through or perspective through experience. Yeah. And so for me, that's exactly what this is. It's like I've been down these roads, these rabbit holes before where I thought everything was done. I was over. I couldn't do this and that. And I continued going for 300 times, 300% more than I thought I could. And I wasn't even scratching the surface of where I could have gone. So my mind is always going back to that. This is nothing compared, and this is the reason why in the soft courses, if you look at assaulters course, and generally speaking, regardless of the country that's running their soft programs, is generally when guys are finding themselves in certain situation in combat, they will refer to their training and say, I actually had a harder time during Hell Week or whatever the case may be.
That's right.
Just because they have something to contextualize it against. And so that bank of perspective, you can build it daily. And throw all kinds of stuff in there. And eventually it will come back when external factors, it goes back to exactly what I was talking about earlier. Be able to use your internal inoculation to benefit you when external factors are hitting.
The science of parasympathetic and down regulating and all of that good stuff. It's amazing. It's amazing that this knowledge is out there. It's amazing that we can use it in sentences. But when I was in the game, those words didn't exist. No one ever said the word down regulate unless they were confused. So the idea for me is this. We weren't taught anything other than get on with cracking out home runs in your job. Freaking get after it. And day after day, week after week, year after year, you just get used to adversity. You get used to being resilient. You get used to thinking about something that's directly in front of you like this, I've done harder.
Yeah.
If you can say that casually, as I can, throughout most of my life, I've done way harder than this. Whatever, bring it, you dummies. That's how I think. But you've got to do stonking hard stuff to be able to just pull that casually out of your hip pocket and say, whatever, this is a joke. You've just got to do incredibly hard things a whole pile of times to then be able to look at the world and see it as a non-factor.
Yeah. So have you got anything else on that?
Yeah, what's also interesting when it comes to adversity is people are wanting to go through life comfortable with sometimes realizing that sometimes they face adversity. I'm the other way around. I realize that I need to constantly face adversity in order for the comfortable time, for me to be grateful for the comfortable times. And so how you take your comfort for granted, or you take your life as it were, if it's going well and you're kind of flying high and you're on top of the world. Whereas I'm so grateful for these moments here because I know that around the corner is a continuation of an adversity piece in whatever form that might come. But whatever comes out of those gates, you know, you just have to be prepared for it. But you also need to understand that it's never stopping. Ultimately, this life is finite. So all we're going to experience is the, positive emotion associated with feeling good and doing certain things. And we're going to have adversity, at various levels, depending how lucky or or where you are, because there is an element of luck. Like, it's called a spade, right? Like, if your grandma died when you're 9, like, there's nothing you could have done about that. So there's luck there if it hasn't happened. But the point is, stop waiting for life to stop throwing adversity your way and just work on being so much stronger for when the adversity comes out.
Yeah, in my hometown, a few days ago, a guy, he bumped into me on the sidewalk. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Good. How you doing?" "Dude, you look like you look burly." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Yeah, you're looking shredded." I said, "Okay. What are you training for?" And I just looked him square in the eyes and said, "Dude, life." And then I went to the grocery store. That's how I feel, man. I mean, there's no events lined up for this week or next year or whatever. I've never stopped training, ever, ever, ever. Not a week in my life have I ever stopped training since before I joined the army. So that's a pretty solid number of decades where I understand that life is the mission. And there's no real need to create an artificial event to work towards. If you got to do that, do that. But I just look at every day as a day to be a little tougher.
Yeah. All right, we got a couple more comments, and then we'll do some final thoughts, and then we'll shut her down for the day. Tanya carries on with Western society wants to preserve the innocence of childhood until that person dies of old age, and also is willing to sell their kids' childhood for TikTok videos. This is a great point, though, that do you want to preserve the innocence of childhood until the person dies, which that's that search for the fountain of youth, right?
Good luck, Peter Pan.
Exactly. Salty Jinx. Sorry, go ahead.
That's prioritizing longevity over intensity, which is, in my opinion, the worst way to live life.
Yeah. It's survival versus living,
it's
right?
It's a feeding tube, man. Lay on your back, put in an IV, and start watching Netflix.
Yeah. It's actually, if you were to ask that around the internet, I think you'd get more people that would say, yeah, absolutely, hook me up, than people would say no.
Yeah. That's called the Matrix, by the way.
Yes, it is indeed. Salty Jinx says, but there's a flip side to that, in that a person can find and rebuild small pieces and habits one at a time until they crawl their way back through post-traumatic growth to find their own resilience. And I absolutely, I think it's not really a flip side, though, is that's how you build resilience.
Well, only if you know that that's what you're doing. I mean, as Salty Jinx just said, to find their own resilience, you can only you can treat it like a lottery that hopefully one day you figure out what you're actually doing. It just shows up one day. Oh, that's what I was doing. Or you can intentionally sit down and consider how you want to run your program, how you want to run your life. And as I read Salty Jinx there, he understands that you don't find your resilience in a Cracker Jack box. You frickin' create it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Wellness is a choice, not an accident.
Yeah. Solid Jinx then says it takes time and a willingness to do it, though, and that is
Yep.
the patience to allow the time.
Sure.
And
that as it should,
Mhm.
because anything that came fast and easy ain't resilience.
Yes, absolutely. Tanya says, here we go. In physical therapy, I learned oftentimes a tight/painful muscle is a weak muscle. It doesn't need gentle massage. It needs to be strengthened at all ranges.
Mhm.
That is a great point. And it's a great allegory for resilience across the board in all of the pillars, I think. If there's a weakness and there's a Stoic quote, the obstacle is the way. Martin Dominic says, Shaun, yes, the will to live. 100%
Yes.
is will. And Chris K, last one, great episode. I just want to say hello. Enjoy out Pegasus.
Check.
Absolutely. Those that don't know, Shaun is going to be attending, and Seb's going to be attending Operation
I'm looking forward to
Pegasus
seeing you,
Jump.
buddy. Do I see you
time.
tomorrow? Or are we seeing each other today?
The 12th.
Check.
12th. There you go.
I'm in Powell River until the 12th, so I'm going to do a lot of training. I got a stupid hike in last night, which stopped me from sleeping all night.
Yeah, I saw that.
my leg was screaming at me.
You were building resilience.
Building resilience right
Dude,
there.
when I went dead quiet, nobody spoke to me. They were like, let him be in his cave, in his pain.
That's a good place to be sometimes.
Yeah. So let's do some final thoughts, I guess, on pillars of resilience or adversity or really anything else we talked about today. Seb?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't launch into the actual pillars one at a time or whatever. And really, I don't think there was ever a need for it. As long as we're well-rounded, we can have a general conversation without so much structure. But I mean, I think there would be some value in the future to kind of go through the other three and
Absolutely.
just kind of, for lack of better terms, provide some sense of a roadmap. But I think we did that. We implied a lot of the things that we would have been discussing anyways in the context of this conversation here. So I'm pretty confident with that.
Mm-hmm. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with the way the conversation went in respect to the general theme of, man, you want to build your resilience in any pillar. You got to go do hard things. You got to face some adversity. You just got to stop whining. You just got to, for lack of a better term, suck it up every day for a whole pile of time until sucking up hard things is no big deal. I think that we should, to Seb's point, come back and touch on the other pillars because I feel that they in them and of themselves could be individual podcasts for sure, individual episodes for each pillar. Just as this one was to some degree a little conceptual, we didn't give any real actionable items or a roadmap, as Seb said. So perhaps we can build this out in the future with some more tangible things delivered.
Can absolutely set that up. No problem. I will. I'll get the 4 specifically off the APA site, and then we will break those down easily. No problem. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add. I think we hit resilience and we hit adversity, that's really all there is to it. And I think really what we all really need to do in life in terms of adversity and resilience is seek it at the bare minimum. Just seek some, and then keep working on it from there. Because nothing starts. You can't just say, I want to be resilient, and then, like you guys said, hope that it shows up at the door. You got to actually go do it. So you have to be able to learn new things. You got to be able to build yourself up, and you got to grow into who you're supposed to be every day. You do that with us here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
See you, everybody.